Hey guys, this is Adam, and today I want to talk about how can you connect your data factory pipelines to your on-premise data solutions or those hidden within virtual private networks using something called Self-hosted Integration Runtime. Stay tuned. So let's jump into Self-hosted Integration Runtime. If you remember my diagrams, Integration Runtime is something that runs your pipelines within Data Factory. So it is your compute infrastructure that is used for Data Factory to run data flows, data movement, activity dispatching, so calling external services, and if you're using SSIS, this is also the place where your SSIS packages are being executed. What in this case is the self-hosted integration runtime? Well, let me explain by showing you an example. If you have Data Factory and you have Integration Runtime, the one provided by cloud, so whenever you execute any pipeline in Data Factory, Azure automatically provides you with Integration Runtime. This is auto-resolved Integration Runtime. What it can do, it can connect to any kind of service within Azure itself without any issues. And if your resources are protected with virtual network, in the firewall setting, it can still connect to those if you are using managed identity to authenticate to those resources and you have enabled access for protected services. If you don't, then your data factory will not be able to connect to those resources either using the integration runtime that it gives you. And if you want to connect using the same integration runtime to on-premise environments, the case will be the same because this is a public service. It cannot connect to your on-premises private networks. So to solve both of those scenarios, you can do something else. You can actually install your own integration runtime on a virtual machine or on premises, therefore a self-hosted integration runtime. So you host your own integration runtime wherever you want. In the first case, you install it on a virtual machine within the same virtual network as those resources have configured in a firewall setting, allowing you to connect from the data factory to firewall protected services. And for the on-premise environment, you can do pretty much the same. So install your own integration runtime within your on-premise environment to connect to your on-premise data sources. If you have VPN set up, then that integration runtime can also be in the cloud and still connect there, as long as the virtual networks are configured in a way to do so. And the very last scenario for the self-hosted integration runtime would be installing your own drivers to connect to different sources that are not normally supported, like SAP. So to summarize, you are using self-hosted in runtime whenever you're connecting to private virtual networks, so on-premises environment, and bring your own driver scenarios. One of the key differences for self-hosted runtimes is that it can move data between private network sources, and it also can dispatch activities, so call external services for the private networks. But it cannot be used to run data flows, so if you're using mapping data flows, that's definitely not a scenario for you, and it cannot run SSIS packages at this moment. Those are the key differences that you should take into consideration whenever you're deciding to host your own integration runtime. So time for a demo. Today's demo is quite bigger, but it's end-to-end scenario for integrating on-premise environments. And what I did, I created a script that will create two virtual machines. One will be our SQL VM, which will be imitating our on-premise data source, and one more virtual machine within the same network where we're gonna install our integration runtime. By default, the script creates SQL server on that virtual machine and gives it a private IP only, so you cannot connect to this SQL VM outside of this network. Next, we're gonna install the integration runtime ourselves on this virtual machine, and we're gonna make sure that Data Factory can connect through this integration runtime to the SQL server through the private IP, pull the data in, and put it in a storage account. With that said, we can go into the demo, but before we go in and start creating stuff in the portal, I want to show you what scripts that I prepare for you. First of all, there's a couple of scripts. There's the environment create, it's a CLI script that will create all those resources that I was talking about. This is the first thing that you need to copy and go to the Cloud Shell in Azure, pull it up, and once the terminal connects, just simply paste in your script. After about 7 to 10 minutes, the script should complete, at which point you should get information about 2 virtual machines, their private, public IPs, username and a password for each one of them. So let's establish connection to the VM which is for Integration Runtime. Let's copy its public IP and let's go to Remote Desktop Connection Manager to create new remote desktop connectivity. So paste in the IP. Let's call it VM just to be sure that this is the VM we're connecting to. Let's copy the username into the logon credentials, into the username, remove the domain, and copy the password that was generated and paste in the password. Hit add and simply connect to the server. Accept the certificate and let it connect. Once everything opens up, you can close all the windows and you're ready to start working on it. So the first order of the business from the VM or the servers that you're gonna be installing the integration runtime, the first and foremost, the important stuff is to test connectivity to the target server that you will be connecting to. Since in my case, I will be connecting to the VM SQL over this private IP here, I need to test connectivity there. And the way I like to do it is using PowerShell. So inside of PowerShell, simply type test-net connection, paste in the IP and type the port, which is for SQL Server is 1433. Press enter and check what are the results. As you see, we were able to get the successful response of true, in which case we can continue working on that, since this server is able to connect to our server. And the second thing is optional. I do it when I'm working with SQL servers. So I prepared a script for you, which you can use to install either SQL Server Management Studio, or you can install Azure Data Studio, so that we can connect to our database. And once the installation is completed, you will be able to find Azure Data Studio on this machine. And we're gonna use that to connect to that database. So what we need right now is the server, in which case we're copying again the private IP of our SQL, pasting in here, selecting SQL login, this is what is currently set up for the demo, selecting the user, pasting it in, selecting the password, and pasting it in, and hitting connect. This will connect because that database is empty by default. Once you successfully connect and open the server, you will see there's no database there at this point. But what is good is that at this point you're pretty much also testing the connectivity, that it's working just fine. So let's hit new query and initialize the database with some test data that we can use for the demo. So go back to the scripts that I provided and there's a script called initialize database. Simply copy paste it, put it here and hit run. Once the script completes, you can refresh the databases, find your new demo database with a table called cars, from which you can select the data and see top 1000 rows in our sample data. This is the end of the setup for the demo. Right now you already have the clean server, you have the clean SQL server, the connectivity works, and you are ready to start setting up the integration runtime. At this point you can simply close all those windows and prepare for installation of Data Factory. So let's go back to the portal and let's close this, because at this moment we can actually hide it or close it. Go back to resource groups, open the resource group that was created, which is called Azure Data Factory Self-hosted IR, and you can review what is currently inside. As you see, currently inside you will have 2 virtual machines, one being SQL Server virtual machine and a storage account where we're gonna put our data after extraction. For the demo purposes, on the storage account I'm gonna quickly create a single container called demo. This is where I will output the data later on. But for now, let's just create it and leave it. At this point we don't have a data factory, so very quickly let's create that. Let's hit create and call it IR demo. Let's select the resource group and select North Europe, because this is the region that I created all those resources in, and let's hit create. Once the resource is created, after a couple of seconds, open Author and Monitor for the Data Factory editor to come up. Let's change the zoom a little bit and go to the Author tab, and in here inside of the connections you will find a section called Integration Runtimes. In here by default you always have Auto Resolve Integration Runtime, which is the one provided by Azure, but you can also create new and create your own integration runtime. So select the first option, hit continue. You don't want Azure one, you actually want self-hosted. Hit continue, give it a name, I'm gonna call it on-prem. Hit create. And at this point you pretty much have it in the portal, but you also need to install it on the machine itself. To do so, you need to install Integration Runtime. And to do that, you need two things. As you see, there are two steps. You need to download and install Integration Runtime. When you click on it, a new website will be opened for the Microsoft download. Just copy that URL into the virtual machine. And on the virtual machine, you need to paste that URL in. So let's use recommended settings here on the Internet Explorer and paste in the URL. And simply press enter. You don't actually have to add websites to Trusted, simply hit close. This opens non-JavaScript enabled website where you simply need to hit download. It will still prompt you to add it, hit close, and if you scroll down you will see the actual installation link here. So always grab the latest version, hit download, add the download to Trusted in order to be able to actually initialize the download. Hit the download link again and hit save. Once the download has been finished, simply hit run. At this point you can also close the browser if you want, hit next, accept the terms, hit next, and install. Once it's done, hit finish. It will open the Integration Runtime window and it says you need to register. So what we did right now is we already registered the Integration Runtime in Data Factory. We only installed the service locally, so we need to register it so they connect together. And to do that, you need to paste in the key. You can actually grab the key in the portal. You can either use key 1 or key 2, depending whatever you want. Copy this from the portal, paste it here, hit register. Once it registers, hit finish. And after 10-15 seconds, you should get a response that your self-hosted integration runtime node has been successfully registered in Data Factory. At this point, you can actually hit Launch Configuration Manager, although you don't have to. When you open this, you will see information about your self-hosted integration runtime being connected. Sometimes you get this issue here about runtime upgrade. It is not always required, so definitely check it here. At this point, you're ready to go. As you see, it disappeared after a couple of seconds. You can go back to the portal, where after closing this window, you should be able to see your new on-prem self-hosted integration runtime. When you go into it, notice a couple of stuff. First of all, you're gonna have a node tab. This is the server that you currently registered and you have currently running the service on. You can have multiple servers within the single integration runtime definition. You can also select auto update, which by default is selected. Remember about that. This will automatically update the integration runtime from time to time. So you can actually pick the time at which point it will be updated. And lastly, sharing is a great option because you can actually share a single integration runtime installation across multiple data factories to save a lot of costs and management. And that's it. That's how you set up the integration runtime. You can actually close this window and start using it. So let's do a demo and a test where we're gonna use that SQL server. So let's type SQL for the link service. Let's find it on the list. I saw it there on the bottom. So it's SQL server that we're gonna be connecting to. This will be our on-prem SQL. What we need to right now, I'll write underscores. Now we need to change the integration runtime. And as you see, this is the important part. We're not using auto-resolve integration runtime, so the one provided by Azure. We're using our own to do the connection. We need to provide a server name. And as you remember, for the server name, I need an IP. So let's go back to the portal and open the Cloud Shell. If you by any chance close the Cloud Shell, you're not gonna get those credentials that I showed you. But I prepared a script that actually saved those credentials inside of a file. So this is a perfect example to show you that in case you closed it yourself. The script is actually saving the output within the Cloud Shell. So you can actually type ls cloud drive. You're gonna find Azure Data Factory Self-hosted Integration Runtime JSON, and you simply need to check the content of that file to get the output from the previous script. So if you're gonna lose it, this is where you can find the credentials for your virtual machines. So simply copy the private IPs, go to the data factory, paste in the server name. You also need the username, so paste in here. Remember to give a database name. In our case, that was demo database. We have a username and we need to provide a password. So let's go and grab the password to our SQL VM, paste it here. And now is the critical part. If everything went fine, by hitting test connection, you should see successful message that first of all, connectivity works, your credentials are working as well. Hit create, and at this point, you have a new link service connected to your on-premise through your integration runtime. Let's add one more link service to our storage account so we can actually output the files. I'm gonna call it blob. I actually can use my auto-resolve integration runtime in this case. Select from Azure subscription the storage account that we created previously as part of the script. Again, test connection here as well. Now we have a connectivity between our blob storage and the SQL service on premise. So what we can do is create a very small pipeline in which we're gonna copy a data. And we're gonna copy a data from where? From a new data source from our on-premise SQL. So let's type SQL, use SQL Server, use the link service from our on-prem, call it cars table, right again, underscores, cars table, choose a table name, dbo.cars. And here, if it actually says dbo.cars, it's already connected to the right database and it sees the table inside. So you can select it, hit OK, and do the sync mapping, in which case add a new dataset. This is the dataset for the blob storage. Let's save it as a CSV file. Select the link service on a blob storage and let's call it cars CSV. And a browse, put it in the demo container. We want first row as header, so let's not lose any information. And hit OK. And you can either publish here or debug to get the same result. After a couple of seconds, the pipeline finished. In this case, that was 12 seconds. So you can go back to the portal, close this line, go back to your resource group. Inside of the resource group, go to the storage account, go to the container, open demo container, and here you see DBO cars. We forgot to change the extension, but it doesn't matter. Edit, and as you see, this is the extract from your on-premises server using your integration runtime that you created yourself. And let's finish by talking about a couple of important considerations when using integration runtime. First of all, sharing is important, so you can actually share your integration runtime across multiple data sources and multiple data factories to save a lot of costs. Additionally, you should always try to keep it close to your data source, but I wouldn't recommend it to install it on the same machine just for the maintenance purposes. And if you have Power BI Gateway installed, don't install integration runtime on the same machine. And lastly, currently integration runtime is Windows servers only service, so you cannot install it on the Linux machine. And if that machine has FIPS compliant encryption, it might cause some jobs to fail. So either disable that or pick another machine to install that. And those are the most important considerations when installing Data Factory Integration Runtime. With self-hosted integration runtime, nothing is keeping you right now from integrating your on-premise data sources to the cloud and moving data one way or another. But remember to do some sort of capacity planning, because you need to understand how many of those virtual machines hosting those integration runtimes do you need, and what are the sizes required for those to be running effectively. But for today, that's it. Hit a thumbs up, leave a comment and subscribe if you want to see more, and see you next time.